Welcome back to This Is Working. I'm your host, Dan Roth. I'm the editor of LinkedIn. It is great to have you here with us today, and it is great to have Reed Hastings with us. Reed is the co-founder and co-CEO of Netflix, incredible leader in the entertainment and technology world, and we're thrilled to have him on the show with us today. It's hard to imagine, but there was a long period where Netflix seemed like a startup that wouldn't last. When co-founders Mark Randolph and our guest today, Reed Hastings, launched the world's first online DVD rental store, they had massive competition. If Blockbuster didn't crush them, one of the other video rental companies surely would. Now, over 20 years later, Blockbuster is gone, and DVDs are pretty much a thing of the past too. Netflix, meanwhile, has just gotten to be a bigger part of our lives, predicting and leading the shift to streaming, and then moving into original content. So if you're keeping count, that's 3 total transformations of this company in just over 20 years. And this company now has over 180 million of us hooked on their product in over 190 countries. Reed, thank you so much for joining us today. Your book's fantastic. It's really a great read. And one of the things that you talk about in the book is this idea of connecting the dots, always be connecting the dots. We've had Danny Meyer on the show, the restaurateur, who's mentioned the same idea. When was the point where you realized, you sort of connected the dots and realized that the Netflix culture was what was enabling you to not just fend off the competition, but to start leading this entire industry?
You know, we always thought culture was important, but I think it wasn't until we did the global expansion. We had been all domestic through 2010, and the original content expansion, and both went well. And we realized that's not normal. And really the underlying thing was this culture of freedom, which got people, employees, to be their own individual thinkers. And they were unconstrained, and that we focused on inspiring people instead of managing that, and that freedom of an inspired group of employees could then figure out challenges that many other firms had struggled with, such as getting into original content.
But there were 2 times in Netflix history where it was questionable about whether you guys were going to make it. I mean, there was times when Blockbuster was going to absolutely destroy Netflix. You had layoffs. There was another time when you moved into streaming and you didn't have original programming, and there was a question about whether people were going to continue to license you programming. At any point, was there a question about whether that sort of freedom that you were giving your employees was enough to help you find the right path to be able to make it through those challenging times? Or were you always confident that, hey, I have hired the best people, they will figure this out? And wasn't there a point where you were like, I'm going to give a top-down, I'm going to tell people top-down what we need to do to be able to make it to the next level?
There are big moments where I do lean in very specifically on things. Fortunately, as the organization gets stronger, it's rarer and rarer. But in the early days, 20 years ago, when we were trying to just survive post the original internet bubble crash, I was heavily involved in speccing individual product features, marketing campaigns. I was your typical hands-on person along with lots of other people. And then, it's only as we grew that we were able to understand enough about, developing people and to make that work. That by maybe 2008, probably 7 or 8 years later, 10 years after founding, that we really hit our stride.
Do you think that this when you read through the book, well, actually, let's talk a little bit about the book. And I would love for you to talk about how applicable this is to other companies. There's people who are watching this and joining this discussion from around the world. They are going to be watching this saying, it's great, Netflix. Reed here has laid out a whole understanding of what makes Netflix, but can I apply any of that to my company and my own professional life? So would you talk a little bit about let's start with the hiring and firing practices of Netflix. I think one of the things that really sets you apart is that you are a big believer in moving people out very quickly, and that giving big severances is a much better, is more humane and more cost effective than putting them on performance improvement plans and kind of nurturing people back and seeing whether they can make it. Would you explain that philosophy and then talk about how you came to realize that this was the right way to manage your people?
I think the book will be useful for all kinds of organizations. For small organizations, it's thinking through for themselves as they're forming their culture. What parts do we like about the Netflix culture? We'll borrow. What parts do we not like and we're going to improve upon? And then for larger companies, they tend to use it as a discussion element. So they'll have a lot of executives read the book, and then, that company's not going to adopt what we do, but through discussion about our choices, it refines their own culture. So you can use it, and people will, in both ways. In terms of talent density, what we've realized is that if you have 10 of the most amazing people, you can get more done than if you have 20 average people. And so that fundamental view, which lots of people have had, has become our animating insight, is that it's really about talent density. Then the question is, how do you pull that off and still be a great place to work? And the answer is the combination of the generous severance packages. So typically 4 to 6 months for entry-level people, so really quite generous. And then second, we never do it quickly. You talked about moving people on quickly. It's always very thoughtfully after a lot of discussion. But we basically ask managers, there's no quotas or anything like that. We basically ask managers to think about, would they rehire the person? Would they keep them if that person was thinking of going to another company? And if they say yes, then great, that person is a keeper. And if not, then we give that person a generous severance package, excuse me, and try to find someone who, will be a rock star in that role. And that goes along with really the paradigm shift. So many companies say, oh, we're a family. And historically, most organizations were family organizations. And we say we're a team. We're like a professional sports team. We want to win the championship. And if you're going to win the championship, you have to have incredible players at every position on the team. And concepts and models of a professional sports team, including the high compensation, rather than the family, which is really about undying support. No matter what your brother does, you stick with them. And really, that's just not an effective metaphor for us.
How do you, in a culture like that, how do you make sure that people aren't always then thinking about what it is that is going to enable them to stay around? Or there's an example in the book of someone who doesn't unpack his box for a year because he is so sure that he is going to not pass the keeper test. Are you screening for people who are not worried about getting fired when you bring them on in the first place? How do you train people not to constantly be worried about that question about whether they will, at some point, the manager come to them and say, this just isn't working out?
Well, think of a competitive athlete and, on a team sport, and they could get injured at any game. And then there could be, in worst case, the whole rest of their career is gone. And yet athletes do not focus on that fear. It's inhibiting. They play light, they play strong, and they've got the mental discipline to really focus on joy. Same thing with our employees. Sure, they know that, someday they may, get a severance package. But the ones who love it, which is most of us, we just love having incredible teammates, and we play hard and light and joyful, and that really drives the success.
Yeah. What in a world like yours, where you have made sure that you have superstar professional athletes, essentially working at the company, you feel like you've got this really great set of people who are all the top of their game. One of the challenges I think a lot of companies run into is that you have people who are all convinced that they're doing the right thing and they're all superstars, but they have to work together. And so someone's great plan, and you've given everyone freedom and responsibility. How do you handle the inevitable conflicts that are going to come up between players who are all have their own vision of what they need to be able to pull off, but those visions conflict with each other?
When we talk about performance, we talk about it as both talent and teamwork. And teamwork is a critical skill. Most people want to be a team player, but only some people really have developed the skill of the blind pass, kind of sensing what should happen even if you can't see it directly. And the corporate equivalent would be, letting certain people know what's happening proactively because you think it's going to affect them and they're going to have an opinion. And, having a great sixth sense about the organization is very helpful. So think of that as the skill of teamwork, which is very much what we select for, in addition to the personal skill, which is no different than, team professional sports. The team dynamics and the so important to the team performance.
Yep. Reed, I just want to tell you, we have people joining this from all over the world. Again, you're watching This Is Working. We have members coming in from Anthony from North Carolina, Roberta from Florida, Miriam from Norway, Joel from South Africa. We have Quincy from Texas. So a lot of people coming in, a lot of questions coming in. I want to bring up some questions that are coming in from the stream. This is a good one from Kelly Michelle, which is, what advice do you give to a budding entrepreneur? You've started 2 companies. You look back, what would you tell yourself when you were starting a company, knowing what you know now?
Well, I've started a lot more than 2, but only 2 succeeded. So,
okay.
So first and obvious advice to an entrepreneur is be ready to fail. But again, I would say the entrepreneurial mindset is non-rational. And you have to be willing to jump out of an airplane without a parachute, because you just assume a bird is going to fly by and you're going to catch it. And so when I look in hindsight at, the commercial risks that we've taken in the early days, it's crazy. And yet occasionally that works out. So I would say, starting things, you do it because you can't not do it. It's just driving you as opposed to it's a rational activity. Because I think given the level of risks and the level of luck that has to come along, the equivalent of the bird flying by as you're falling, is phenomenal.
What do you do about with having such a strong belief in talent density? What do you do if you're an entrepreneur and you just can't hire the best? You've got to have other people who are willing to take this leap of faith with you, and you also probably can't pay the top of market rates that other people can pay. So entrepreneurs starting off, great idea, but can't necessarily get that talent density. What do you do?
Yeah, those are tough situations. You got to make do with what you can, and see what you can do and just be scrappy. It wasn't really until we were a public company that we really started with a high compensation. Before that, it was a wish.
A lot of questions coming in about the entertainment industry and where things are going next. Let's just start it off with where we are today, which is this question of how you are creating entertainment in a pandemic era where people can't actually get together. How is that having an impact on your original programming, and at what point do you think that we will be able to get back to starting to create some of this content together? And then also, how does the pandemic are you expecting to see a drop off in new subscribers once people can actually start having physical and real world activities again?
So we're back to producing in most places of the world. In the US, it's limited. We're doing a lot of testing and we're building up capacity to be able to do more. But in Canada, where fortunately there's very little COVID, we've got a number of productions going, and then throughout Europe and Asia, the same thing. So it does vary by country. In terms of subscribers, we've had tremendous growth over the first half of this year, growing from roughly 170 to 195 million. We'll see what the rest of the year brings. But in the long term, think about it as there's a lot of people on the internet who like entertainment, and we're serving a small fraction of them. So we try to focus on the big picture, which is, we want everyone on the internet to have a chance to have Netflix, like they do YouTube. Frankly, YouTube is the one that's quite far ahead of us, both in reach and in total hours. They get about 7 times more viewing than Netflix does. So we got a long way to go.
So is that going to push you into user-generated content?
No, I don't think the way to compete with another company is to do what they do, because you're not going to do it better. So no, we have to have amazing content that, it just grabs you and everyone's talking about, and that gets, the next 100 million people to join.
Yeah, I mean, but you are directly competing with other companies to be able to produce that kind of content and to make sure that you are having people join you to be able to see, to fall in love with these shows. It's the same thing that Disney's trying to do and others are trying to do too. Is there are there other areas besides, user-generated content might not be the right road? Are there other places where you say, maybe we will go, podcasts, news, sports? Are those areas that you'd want to go into, or are all of those off the table?
Our core focus is series and films, and doing them on a global basis, whether that's The Crown out of the UK, Dark out of Germany, Naked Director out of Japan, and lots of shows out of Hollywood. So, we're just continuing to do what we do, and we're trying to do it at greater scale, at greater quality every year.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of very focused formula has worked really well for our growth over the past 10 years.
As you moved into Hollywood and started to play, for a while you were an outsider in Hollywood, and then you started becoming a kind of a leader and driving force in the entertainment world. You moved internationally. As you enter these other cultures and you start bringing in people who have worked outside the technology industry and either have worked in the entertainment world or maybe in the entertainment world in India or other places, and start joining Netflix, does your culture change to accommodate these other cultures, or do people go through a process of becoming Netflixified?
It's a little of both. We've continued to improve the culture year by year. And some of that is the influence from our international colleagues. Some of it's the influence from creative industries. And we try to make it better and better. And then also we do a bunch of new people, like, here's the culture, this is what we think, this is how to succeed. And one of the best things that companies can do is to write down their culture. An example is the online Netflix culture memo. Mm-hmm. So it's really writing out, over 5 or 15 pages, what kind of behaviors are most valued. And it's a great exercise for teams to do. And I'm not sure there's a superior, culture over another, but it really helps to have whatever culture you have, to have everyone at the company understand it.
Good question from Eleanor Teal, who says, do you think 2020 will accelerate a push towards the decentralization of the entertainment industry? Will there be a power shift from Hollywood to regional studios, independent producers, et cetera? Are you seeing that?
I mean, we're definitely more global than our peer group. And they've been somewhat global, but we produce a lot more in Europe, than Warner Media or even than Disney. But of course, if you think about Disney, the brand, it's a very global brand. So in actual production than them, but in terms of awareness, Disney is an amazing leader.
And then are there things that you're watching from regional producers? Are there hubs that you're saying, oh my, this is, people need to be watching what's being produced out of France or out of India? Or are there places where, as Netflix becomes more global, that you are discovering that there's incredible content and content producers that you think that all of us should be paying more attention to?
Korea, Japan, India, Denmark, France, Germany, UK, Spain, Italy, Brazil. Every major market has highly developed storytelling traditions. And so there's just a great amount of content. So, we had a recent hit, India Matchmaking, a very cute and wonderful show about, Seema, the Auntie Seema, the amazing matchmaker. And, it's filmed in a combination of Mumbai and the US with her clients spread across those. And so it's a fascinating cross-cultural journey. It's an example.
A lot of, as we've had leaders on this show, one of the big topics that keeps coming up and we keep discussing is this question of racial inequality and what business can do to erase systemic issues in society, particularly in the US. And I'm wondering how you think about Netflix's role, and this is a question that comes in from Darren Jenkins, is what kind of diversity initiatives are being developed for Black storytellers? How do you think about what both as a leader of Netflix, the company, and as someone who was putting programming in front of the world. What kind of responsibility does Netflix have to be able to bring more diversity to your business and to the entertainment world?
There's some fields like Silicon Valley software where Black Americans are underrepresented. But in entertainment, there's been a long tradition of success. And we've got a wide variety of Black content and stronger instructors. There's some studies coming out showing basically how strong Netflix is in all those dimensions. So in terms of entertainment, we've just really followed what's great storytelling. And like Ava DuVernay did some great stories for us with 13th, the documentary about mass incarceration, When They See Us. Kenya Barris just did a series, Black AF, that's incredibly funny. And then we've got, great family entertainment like Raising Dion, young Black kid who's got a superpower and learning how to use it. So think of our programming as super diverse, multiple dimensions. And that's been a long-term focus, not of just this year. And I think this year, in reaction really to Black Lives Matter and George Floyd, we've really tried to figure out what can we do about Black wealth creation. The average Black family in America makes about 1/10 or has about 1/10 the assets of a white family. And a lot of that is investment. And so Netflix set aside $100 million to deposit in Black banks. And then they have that money to loan out in their community to start the economic flywheel. So if lots of companies, especially major companies, can take 1 or 2% of their deposits and put them in Black banks, that will make a real difference in, again, closing the economic and wealth gap.
Well, I think after the George Floyd killing, you heard a lot of leaders starting to talk, just saying that things need to change, but not necessarily explaining how they were going to change it. Your efforts to back Black banks was a really interesting one. I would love to just understand how you decided that was where Netflix could make a difference. What led you to down that path?
Well, I think we're, focused on, what's the economic impacts. There's other people really working on the social impacts, like through our content. But the undercapitalization of Black banks has been a persistent theme, and it's something that we knew we could do. And if lots of other companies all put 1 or 2%, of their cash in Black banks, we realized that would make a real difference, and we could try it and set the example and move forward on that basis.
Are you seeing, have you started doing it yet? And are you seeing it make a difference? Are you hearing anything back?
It's making a difference in terms of other companies are exploring it. Costco just committed a huge amount of money. So thank you, Costco. And so, one by one, we're hoping that companies will do something about Black banking. And, it's not going to solve racism. It's not, a huge single silver bullet, but, it's a tangible, practical step that corporations can do to get more investment and more capital in the Black community.
Yep. You are in thinking about going back to the book, there are a number of, you walk through how the Netflix culture makes a difference and how people are guided. In the past, you've talked a lot more about being a data-driven company and about making data-driven decisions. It doesn't come up very often in the book of how you use data to make these decisions. It's more about the people who make the decisions. Why didn't you go into the data in the book, or can you talk a little bit about how the data influences your culture also?
Well, I would say we use data where it's useful, and where it's not, we use judgment. So internally, I say, look, when you're picking stocks, data is a really good thing. And when you're picking a spouse, you probably want to use judgment. And so there's just different domains. So with the service, we do a lot of A/B testing, like most internet companies, and that's very data-driven. We have lots of data on the performance of various shows. But data doesn't really help us in terms of choosing employees or choosing which scripts we're going to produce. That's really been human judgment. And then we lean into people who have great judgment.
Reed, we have about 5 minutes left. I think we got time for a couple more questions. Again, these people are joining for This Is Working. I want to just ask one question here that comes from Nicholas Wallace, which is, what do you think the next big thing will be in the digital streaming game? And I think a lot of people are asking this question about whether you move into gaming. Is that going to be something big, or is there something that is coming next? You're already saying this is where we have to be next when it comes to streaming.
We are now doing interactive programming where you can, direct the story. Bandersnatch was our first and biggest one of that type, and so we're experimenting there. But most of what we're doing is just trying to figure out, how do we tell the world's best stories, the most gripping, the most talked about, the most heartfelt, both in film and series on a global basis. And that's going to consume us for many years.
Yeah. What about gaming? Is that something you would ever want to go into or not?
Well, not in the next couple of years. I mean, we're focused again on the series and films and doing those better. Okay.
If there is any takeaway from this book, if someone is running a small business, they're reading this, they just want to say, look, there are 2 things that I need to know to be able to make my business more successful. What would you tell them?
That factories have dominated our thinking because they've generated so much wealth over 200 or 300 years. And most of us are too influenced by the factory model of the top-down management. The worker follows the rules. And if you're in a creative business, it's much more about new ideas. So it's fine to have a lot more freedom, tolerate some small mistakes, manage really on the edge of chaos. Don't seek efficiency. Seek flexibility and innovation. And if you organize yourself around innovation, you too will develop new practices like some of the ones that we've done at Netflix. But at the highest level, it's about inspiring people instead of supervising them.
Great. Well, Reed, thank you so much for joining us here today. It was a really terrific discussion. I love the idea of managing on the edge of chaos and of setting context rather than control. There's a lot of great information in the book. Highly encourage people to read it. Hold it up again. There it is with Aaron Meyer, who you can also find on LinkedIn. Wrote The Culture Maps, a really terrific book also about how to manage a global workforce. So these are both worth reading. Reed, thank you for joining us here today. Thanks to everyone who asked their questions, and we'll have a lot more. So I hope you'll join us again later, and we can dig in, do a part 2 of this conversation.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks a lot. All right, everyone, thanks for joining. This is Working. We will be back with another great leader in the professional world. We'll let you know. Keep following LinkedIn News so that you can be notified when our next show goes out. Every day we have a show called Business Unusual at 12 p.m. Eastern that talks about what's going on with the world today. Today we have the EVP and GM of Kevin Hart's Laugh Out Loud. That's Ty Randolph, so definitely want to join that. And thank you all for asking such great questions and joining us here today. Really appreciate it.